Hi, my name is Sean McIntosh. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for the webinar on how to best negotiate an Office 365 deal with Microsoft. I just want to go through a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. Phones will be muted during the webinar, and questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation during the Q&A session. If you have any questions, please submit them via the chat console, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Today, Mike Austin from Method 180 is our presenter. Mike has successfully negotiated over $1 billion in Microsoft contracts over his career and heads our service delivery team. He has extensive experience with licensing the Office 365 offering and negotiating with Microsoft account teams. With that, I'll turn things over to Mike to get the presentation started.
Thank you, Sean. Good afternoon, everybody. Just a little bit of what we're going to talk about this afternoon. Oh, just one second. A little bit of what we're going to talk about this afternoon in the agenda. So I'm going to take a couple of seconds to just talk real high level about who is Method 180, and then we're going to talk about Office 365 and how you should look at it. So I'm going to do a little bit of a primer on, I almost want to say licensing, although it's going to go a little bit beyond licensing, not so much on the technical side, but just different ways that we believe that our clients or that people should look at Office 365. I got a little bit of a case study of a client that we just recently worked with, and you know how they negotiated their Office 365 deal, and then a little bit of some pointers on how you can negotiate a good deal around your Office 365 requirements. So Method 180 is a services organization. We're management consultants that work with companies from about 250 employees all the way up to members of the Fortune 100. We really have two kind of core service offerings that we offer to clients. One that we term Method 180 Optimum, which is really a Microsoft negotiation assistance service around negotiating enterprise agreements and renewals or net new purchases. And the second is what we call Microsoft or Method 180 Assert, which is a Microsoft audit assistance. I know we're not talking about audits today, but if you know, organizations are being audited, we help them through that or do internal self-assessments. We are licensing experts, and we have audit experts on staff. Most of our organization are ex-Microsoft. You know, myself personally, I worked there for about 10 years, was responsible for negotiating contracts and developing licensing programs, and left about 6 years ago to help customers negotiate better deals with Microsoft. We've created business processes that no other company has the expertise to execute. We talk a lot about people, process, and product in our engagements, and we believe that's what really differentiates us. And I'm going to talk through, or some of that is going to come out as we talk a little bit this afternoon. So I'd really like to start and say, what is Office 365? I think most organizations know what Office 365 is, or at least they've been positioned it, and it really looks something like this to most organizations. And I put on the top of this slide that Office 365, you know, the marketing components of it. And really what I mean by that is, if you take a look, when I ask my clients, you know, hey, what is Office 365 to you? They come and they say it's Exchange Online, it's Link, it's SharePoint, or I guess Skype for Business now. The slide's a little older, or it's Office Pro Plus through Office 365. So they really view it as this complete package of products. And a lot of the times when we ask clients, you know, what does it mean to you, and we drill into it, it really means maybe one of these. It means that we're looking to migrate our Exchange environment into the cloud, but they're continuing to talk about Office 365, even though all that they really are looking at is maybe a migration of Exchange to the cloud, and then down the road, maybe it's SharePoint or OneDrive for Business or things like that. But I think the key message that we like to get across to organizations, and one of the things that if you want to negotiate a good deal with Microsoft is you have to step back from what they market the product as, which is this full on-suite of products here, and take a look at what it actually means to you. So in other words, step away from the marketing of the brand Office 365 and really look at what it means to you. One of the themes that I'm going to talk about quite a bit this afternoon is that knowing what you don't need when it comes to negotiating with Microsoft is probably more important than knowing what you actually do need, because they do like to create these bundles. So one of the things a lot of my clients will say to me is, Mike, Microsoft is positioning that we purchase Office 365, E3, or what is this E plan? And we'll talk a little bit about these in a few minutes here. But one of the things that I like to get across, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, is that you could just purchase Exchange Online. And so, here's something that I used with a client the other day where we were talking about Exchange 2013. They were looking to migrate that to the cloud, and they were wondering how that correlated to their current Core Cal or their Enterprise Cal in their case, and what the services were that aligned to that. And so, if you really look at it, if you step back from Office 365 and just take a look at Exchange, if you're currently a Core Cal customer, I could purchase Exchange Plan 1, which is just Exchange Online Services, or I could purchase Office 365 E1, which goes back into that bundle of Skype for Business, Exchange, and SharePoint without Office. If I have an enterprise account, what Microsoft will try and tell us is that your purchases align to what they would deem as Exchange Plan 2, because you're using the enterprise features, maybe archiving or journaling or legal hold, products or feature sets of that nature, or that aligns to Office 365 E3. And so I bring this up, and we're going to talk about this again a little later, but the reason that I bring this up is that a lot of the times what happens is when people are looking to negotiate Office 365, it's typically at the time of the renewal of their enterprise agreement where they have either the Core Cal or the eCal, and the renewal proposals that they get from Microsoft align to this Core Cal or eCal. So, it's usually E3, but, you may or may not need that. So we always suggest that we step back and take a look at what do our actual users require. Do they require those features that align to the middle column there, the Core Cal, or do they align to the feature sets that are on the enterprise side? Do all users need that? So in other words, maybe with Exchange Online, only senior management and certain business units require archiving and legal hold, but the rest of our organization doesn't. So let's take a look at what our actual requirements are. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but the same sort of concept holds true for SharePoint. They have both an enterprise and a standard Cal that aligns to the Core Cal. And so again, when you're looking at Office 365, if you are thinking about migrations of SharePoint to SharePoint Online or SharePoint in the cloud, really step back and take a look at what features you need and build up from there. We're going to talk about that as well here in a little bit. And similar for Skype. So I put these slides in here so for reference when we'll send out, I believe, the link to the recording. So if you want to take a look at these or email me, and I'm happy to share the slides. But I just put these here for what feature sets align to what. Now, what ends up happening a lot of the times is when you're looking at do I move to the cloud? You're going to look at, if I'm looking at Exchange, do I buy, an Office 365 bundle, one of those E plans, E1 or E3, or do I buy the individual component, Exchange Online, and do I buy Plan 1 or Plan 2? No different for SharePoint or for Skype or Link. Office is a little bit different because once we get into looking at how Microsoft puts together Office 365, I can purchase Office through Office 365. But there are some differences, and we bring these up because one of the things that we believe and we find when people negotiate a great deal with Microsoft is they have to take a look at what the organization is doing. So in other words, if Microsoft is positioning Office 365 E3, which includes Office, is that the same thing as my current Office 360 or my Office Pro that I'm getting in my enterprise agreement today? And the answer is sort of, but not really. And so Office 365 purchases include what the click-to-run version of Office Pro. It's the same product, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc., but it does have some differences. One being the user-based licensing that a lot of organizations are interested in, where they can install it on 5 PCs, 5 tablets, 5 smartphones, versus the device-based licensing that is kind of the standard perpetual license rights. But the biggest thing is that it does not include downgrades. And I think this is a key message to a lot of organizations that they don't necessarily understand going into these Office 365 negotiations with Microsoft, is that it is Office 2016. You have 1 year where you could run Office 2013 today. So there are really no downgrade rights where you could run, say, Office 2010, or 2007. And plus, it does have a little bit of a feature where it's going to go out and look and make sure that the user that's using it has an active tenant within Office 365, which means that you have to have the user provisioned into Office 365, and then it's going to go out and take a look and potentially start pushing down just updates and things of that nature based on those rights. If the user isn't an active user in Office 365, click to run will go into a reduced function mode where it's basically just a viewer. I can open a document, but I can't edit, print, forward, all that sort of stuff. And so this is one of the things that needs to be considered is what's the impact of click to run versus an on-premise edition of Office 365, and that's something that we work through with our clients. There's also two different ways that you can purchase Office 365 subscriptions, and both of these ways have some benefits and some disadvantages. And so when most organizations are thinking of Office 365, what they are hearing and considering is what Microsoft refers to as a user subscription license, or a USL. It's that typical, we're going to move from ownership of licenses to the subscription model that most people think of when it comes to Office 365. And so that is a true user-based license. I buy Office 365, E3, for instance, for all my users, and that's how I count. And that's what Microsoft positions. There is another option that is available, which is what is called an add-on user subscription license. So in other words, if I have active software assurance on my Office license or the Core Cal or eCal, I can add Office 365 on top of my software assurance and give my users Office 365. So what's the difference here? The first is that if we're talking about Office, the USL is fully user-based, whereas if it's Office and I'm doing an add-on to that, my Office licenses would still be licensed device-based, and then the subscription gets added on to make my user-based. So in other words, if my primary PC at work was licensed under this model through our Office license with software assurance, and then I add Office 365 on top of that to Mike as a user, my PC is covered. I can run the on-premise version. So in other words, I actually get rights to 2010, for instance. I don't necessarily have to upgrade to 2013 or 16 right away. And then Mike, as a user, now has an Office 365 subscription, so we can put his email in the cloud, or he can have that rights to 5 copies for other PCs or other devices or things of this nature. So it just is an add-on to the way that you may be licensing today if you're still on kind of the perpetual licensing model. There are some advantages to that, and obviously there's some disadvantages. One of the things that we like about the add-on approach is a lot of our clients are very concerned with the out years of Office 365. So if I sign an EA or purchase of Office 365 for 3 years, and then what happens when I come up for renewal? I'm on subscription licenses. I don't own anything that's perpetual anymore. What happens? Is Microsoft just going to increase my price, or I negotiated a good deal today? Will they hold my discounts? The add-on option allows you to keep your perpetual licenses. So 3 years from now, I'm not just subscription-based. I own what's ever current. And so I could move out of the cloud. But because you own those perpetual licenses, we believe that it's going to put you in a little bit better position with Microsoft in the out years, because you have a little bit more control over what you can do versus you don't have any licenses, you're subscription-based, so renew your Office 365, or if you want to come out of the cloud, you got to go out and buy all licenses to get current again. And so it does give you a little bit of protection. And again, these are some of the things that when we work with our clients and we suggest to organizations that are thinking about Office 365 is that you look at these different models to figure out what makes the most sense for you, and what's the, what benefits does it have, what's the disadvantages, and what's the risk and reward associated with that. One of the big things that we're seeing out of Microsoft as they entered into their new fiscal back in July is a shift away from, or a shift into some newer positioning around the Windows OS. And I know we're talking specifically about Office 365 this afternoon, but this is important because we are seeing them position this in their renewal agreements, a move to user-based Office. So back in about January, I believe it was, of last year, they announced a user-based license of Office, and they've actually put that into what they call the Enterprise Cloud Suite, or ECS. So if you are hearing Microsoft position ECS and wondering what it is, it's an inclusion of Windows into Office 365. And really what it did, and this is important to understand, was if you take a look at what Microsoft allowed or didn't allow with your on-premise or just software assurance. So if we look at the left side of this chart, basically if we had software assurance, we could install it on our corporate PC, we could access a VDI with it, we could go home and access a VDI, but we weren't allowed to upgrade our home PC. So it just allowed for access to a VDI through what they call roaming rights on a home PC. If we were doing BYOD, where they were bringing in their own device or a third party, what's considered a third party device, we weren't allowed to install a local copy of Windows on there. So in other words, if we did BYOD and you brought in your own personal PC and you wanted to put Windows Enterprise on there and upgrade to Windows 10, for instance, you couldn't do that with the software assurance. You weren't allowed to access a VDI instance inside your four walls or inside the corporation with that device, because once it goes on the network, becomes a managed device, and therefore Microsoft would say that's a qualified device that needs to be licensed. So we weren't allowed to do that, but the home use rights were still the same. So what they did was they announced a user subscription license that you can buy a full-on USL, or you could buy an add-on. That doesn't override the rules where you need to have a Windows OEM license on your PC. All it did was make Windows user-based. And really what it did was solve one challenge that Microsoft had in their product use rights around VDI and BYOD. And so basically, if we put a user subscription license on that PC, we can enable BYOD, do upgrades on those PCs, depending on what it is, because they've made some differentiation around if it has a qualified OEM license versus say a Linux machine or tablets. But it did enable VDI. So if you were doing VDI in a BYOD environment, this is the only way that you can enable those PCs to be able to access that. So I get asked a lot of the time, what is it that Microsoft is trying to sell me? And this is where we talk a lot about knowing what you don't need is more important than knowing what you do need. And so what do I mean by that? Typically when clients talk about Office 365, they talk, and the proposals they receive from Microsoft fall into these Office 365 e-suites. And there's really, three of them. I'll touch on kiosk here in a second, but there really are three of them. There's an E1 suite, an E3 suite, and an E4 suite. And really, what's the difference between those? E1 aligns to that core Cal functionality like we talked about earlier for Exchange, SharePoint, and Skype for Business, so the standard features, and does not include Office. E3 adds Office in and then adds the enterprise features for Exchange, Skype for Business, and SharePoint. And E4 adds on the voice components, or what equals the Link Plus Cal today, into Office 365. And they have announced an E5 SKU that's coming out here shortly, but that does a little bit more around PBX replacement and things of that nature. But really, most of the time when we see proposals from Microsoft, they'll be proposing E3 or E4, and maybe a little bit of a kiosk SKU. And so what the kiosk SKU really is for environments where you have shared PCs. Great examples of these would be in manufacturing. Out on the shop floor, you may have a kiosk where people that work on the shop floor just go up and check email, and you may have 20 people that go up to one PC. They don't have their own. That's kind of a kiosk environment. We see that sometimes in healthcare, where these kiosk licenses may make sense around nursing stations and nurses getting emails on a single PC at the nursing station or something of that nature. But they're really for shared PC environments where the end users don't have a dedicated device to just go up and check, say, email or log on to SharePoint to download a form or something of that nature. So we do see kiosk use out there. Now, I mentioned that what we're seeing, one of the things about Microsoft is that they are a very scorecard-driven organization. And so what I mean by that is your account executive or your account rep at Microsoft has a quota. They care about selling their quota. They want to make that in terms of what they sell you and any other accounts that they have. But they also have a number of metrics that maybe aren't revenue based that drives their behaviors. And so those could be things like, selling voice-enabled seats of Skype for Business. So a lot of times if you have a proposal from Microsoft around, your renewal, and they're pushing this Link Plus Cal, and you don't use those features, why do they keep pushing that, Mike? It's likely because it's a scorecard metric. And so they have a number of those. We are seeing them position this Enterprise Cloud Suite quite heavily. We believe it's a high ranking scorecard for them in their new fiscal year. So if you've got a renewal coming up, they likely will position this to you. And so what is the ECS or Cloud Suite? It really is just Office 365 E3 with their new product, their EMS or Enterprise Mobility Suite, which is really their MDM solution that would compete with Mobile Iron or some of those types of technologies with some AD premium features with Azure. And then they added in that Windows per user SA. And so that's a key thing that they're trying to do. So if you are positioned the ECS suite, just remember that what they're trying to sell you is Office 365 E3 with their mobility management suite, and then move Windows to user-based license as well. Okay. So what I want to talk about is how do we go about taking a look at this in our client base. And this is a client that we just worked with. They weren't a large client, but it's a really good example of what happens in these negotiations. So they're a manufacturer with about 1,500 users. They had a traditional EA up for renewal, so they had Office and the Windows OS and the Core Cal, and that was up for renewal. And Microsoft was really positioning hard for them on an enterprise, what they call the Enterprise Cloud Suite, or that ECS, or they gave them another option with E3 with user-based Windows. So they even differentiated their proposals from them, because they did give them one that was just E3 with kind of standard device-based Windows. But they were giving them, I call them staggered discounts, where the ECS one got the best discount, E3 got a good discount, and then the device-based E3 got an okay discount, and then anything else had no discount. So we could see that they were really pushing hard towards this ECS suite. And this organization, when we started talking to them, they were actually getting ready to move forward with an Office 365 E3 purchase. They were just trying to push Microsoft to give them a bit better deal on the device-based one. They felt that the user-based Windows had some risk to them, which when we talked to them, there was some there. But we actually pulled back the onion and asked them that question: what is it that you're considering doing? What are you looking to do? And they paused and they said, well, what do you mean, Mike? And I said, okay, what is it what does Office 365 mean to you? Why do you want to buy this? And they basically said, look, we actually want to consider a move to Exchange Online. We think we have a business case based on the storage cost, moving a few servers out of our data center. We think we can get an ROI on moving our Exchange environment off-premise into the Office 365 cloud. And so when I started talking to them about what would their plans be with SharePoint or, say, Skype for Business, it actually wasn't even a consideration. They were just thinking about this fully for Exchange. They figured that they would look at Link and SharePoint a little further down the line. But they hadn't started piloting. They actually had a couple of other projects that were priorities that they couldn't even look at piloting Office 365 for 6 months. And then they would start to make a move if the pilot was successful in about 9 months. And so, what they had thought was that based on the discounts that Microsoft was offering them, that they had a great deal on Office 365. And so they wanted to move forward with that. And so we started talking to them as well about, some of the differences between what would happen with their Office licenses around run-to-click versus on-premise. They were running off Windows 7 and Office 2013 with no plans to change that to Windows 10 and Office 2016 anytime soon. And the other thing that they had going on was that they were looking to bring on their subsidiary in India into the agreement. They had 100 or so users over in India that they wanted to bring into the agreement that were currently excluded from it. And so when we started talking to them about Office, and they realized that they could run their current users on the Office 2013 on-premise version, but the Indian subsidiary would have to go to run-to-click, and it started to get really confusing for them even at an organization this size, considering larger organizations, 100,000 users, 50,000 users, the complexities can become even greater. So we went through this process with them where we reviewed not just their purchase of Office 365, we looked at all of their EA purchases, so that included, their SQL environment, their Windows servers. We optimized out those licenses, make sure that they were buying the right licenses, not just for what they were used or what they had owned, but we were taking a look at what are they using today, where are they going, and then we dissected Office 365 and developed what I'll call a realistic rollout time frame that 6 months before they would do a pilot, 9 months before they would roll it out, and then they figured it would be 3 months for them to actually get all of their users in. So they were looking at a year before they actually were able to get Office, Exchange Online out there in production. I mentioned that we talked through the click-to-run stuff with them, and then we did a financial evaluation of both user and user subscription licenses, so those true USL or Office 365 subscriptions, versus an add-on approach. And then we took that and developed a couple of other options for them that may have made more sense for them to purchase, and went back to Microsoft to request pricing on those options or a better deal. And really, here's, I've simplified this chart, but this is, a summary that we had put together for them. And this is obviously in hundreds of thousands of dollars, but we put together a thing that said, here's what Microsoft is proposing for you guys. So if you look at the device-based Office, it was about $580,000 a year. The user-based one was $605, and then the ECS suite was $665. And so, they were really considering that option about $580,000 a year. This had some pricing concessions and a couple other things built into it. But when we peeled back and started to look at it, we went to them and said, okay, let's look at the add-on approach. And so we were actually able to show them how to do the add-on approach for cheaper than the device-based approach of Office 365, which meant that they got to keep their perpetual rights to Office and the core cal, so that in 3 years, if they didn't go or they wanted to move back, they still own those licenses. And so that was interesting to them. But the other thing that we did was we actually showed them that they could roll out and ramp into Office 365. And this is something that a lot of organizations don't realize, is that you don't have to purchase it all up front. You can actually purchase what you need today and roll into it. And so what we showed them was take a little bit on signing and then pay for it as you go, because Office 365 is a monthly subscription. You pay for users the month that you add them. So in their case, since they weren't going to start adding for 9 months, and then get to full deployments by the end of the year, and I think in the model we moved it up and moved it to 6 to 9 just to show it a little bit more aggressive in case. But we were able to show them that, you can save pretty substantial dollars for an organization this size by looking at it through this perspective. And what that really meant was that if you take a look at Microsoft's proposal that they were considering, which is this, $1.7 million over 3 years, they could do the same purchase for 1.2, or if they just went with Exchange Online, they could do it for 1.1. But really what that meant was there was a value gap of about $500,000 or 30% between what Microsoft was proposing with, their best proposal that they could give them, and what the client could get through programmatically reconstructing the deal. So the other thing to note is that these 3 options are not discounted. These are just, if we go forward with these, we can do this. This is what it costs. So this isn't the final deal that we ended up getting this client, but it is the analysis that we did for them to step back and say, hold on, purchasing Office 365 all up front, or purchasing, Office 365 when maybe all we need is Exchange Online, it might not be the right thing. And so, we created obviously a report that went through the risks and benefits of each of these options for them. But we were able to show them that, you can drive savings and cost out of this by just stepping back and rethinking the way that you do this. So, how do I as an individual negotiate the best Office 365 deal for my company? And I think that one of the key things is we look at it from this perspective all the time. There's really 3 core elements to when you're looking at doing an Office 365 purchase that need to be understood. The first is the business requirements. Why do we want to move to Office 365? So if I go back to our manufacturer, they had an ROI that cost of storage and servers in their data centers was greater for them to manage and run that than if they moved it to the Office 365 cloud. So they did, IT was able to create a business, requirement or a business case for that. The second and most important thing is what's in the yellow box, which is what's the deployment plan and what's the roadmap. So that's where you step back and you take a look at how would we roll this out? What do we need? Is it Office 365 E3 or is it Exchange Online? Is it Plan 1 versus Plan 2? Is it all users Plan 1, all users Plan 2? Is there a mix? What's the best way to do this? And then the third component is the cost. And in our engagements with clients, we always tell people that in the organizations where we help them drive the biggest savings, if we've helped somebody save 40, 50, 60%, it's because they've done what's in the peach and yellow first and then focused on price with Microsoft. And we find a lot of the times the negotiations with Microsoft are around price. Some of the best unit costs for Office 365, and the stuff in the yellow roadmap's or yellow circle here is not thought out. So you really need to step back, develop a team, and think through what's our plan, how can we buy this, what do we really need, how do we map that out, and then how do we show Microsoft that there's a value gap. With our manufacturer, we showed a value gap of about 30% from Microsoft's proposals to what they could do. We've seen those gaps, 50, 60% sometimes, and those really put you in the driver's seat in a negotiation when you go to Microsoft with value gaps that look like that. And so, I put together a few bullet points to kind of talk through what should we do if you're thinking about Office 365 or you have a renewal coming up. What should we do? I think the first thing you need to do is build a team that includes finance, legal, and IT. A lot of the times we find that these are negotiated, maybe in one of these, but they really are components of all three that need to be leveraged. So we need to look at what's the benefit of maybe moving to subscription-based licenses, because maybe that means moving from capital cost to operating cost, and maybe our organization likes that. But maybe if we look on the add-on approach and what's the model that this would cost us, and how does the organization look at cash flows and things like that. So there is a fairly substantial element that of finance that's involved in these negotiations now. Obviously legal, the cloud T's and C's from Microsoft, if you follow Gartner or any of the analysts out there, they'll tell you that Microsoft needs work on their T's and C's, and so it's very important that legal is involved in looking at indemnifications and liability and privacy and all that sort of stuff. And then the third element is obviously IT. And I by the way, when I say finance, I usually put purchasing and finance in the same kind of group there. But obviously IT is required to take a look at what's the business case for making this decision or whatnot. Again, you want to step back and evaluate all of your Microsoft technologies. So don't just make this an Office 365 negotiation. Try and bring it all in. Microsoft loves to do all-up negotiations. Hey, you need all these Office licenses, Windows and CALs and Office 365 and Windows and System Center and SQL, and that's $5 million a year. And so as much as they like to do that, you should evaluate each of those products, not for the all-up $5 million, but each product by product, what's required. There may be significant savings that you could get if you opened up or considered looking at your SQL environment and what you're doing there. So we always suggest that you look at all your Microsoft licenses at the time that you're doing this, if it's not at the time of, say, a renewal when everything's up. And you really want to reset your licenses. And what I mean by that is a lot of the times when we look at enterprise agreements where people have been on them 3, 4, 5 times, now I can look from the first one to the second one to the third one to the fourth one and see how the counts have grown through true-ups. And it's just, continue to buy the licenses they have, even though there's been lots of changes in terms of virtualization rules and things like that. So you really want to reset your licenses. Take a look and do, an internal look at what do we have deployed, what's the best way to license that using our inventory today, optimize that out, and then take a look at where we're going in the future and figure out what do we need to do to set us up to make sure that we're buying the best licenses in the future. So reset your licenses based on your needs today, and then take a look at where you're going over the next 12, 18, 24 months and sort of map that into that. It's very crucial to remember that knowing what you don't need is more important than knowing what you actually do need with Microsoft. And that just comes down to the fact that they love to bundle. I mean, they'll use the analogy themselves that they're kind of like the cable company. You want CNN, but you got to buy 10 other channels in order to get CNN. You want Exchange Online, but we want to sell you Office 365 and all the other components of that in order for you to get Exchange Online. So you really want to understand what it is that you need, and sort of what it is that you don't need, so that you can model out what does it cost me to purchase what I do need, and is maybe Office 365 is the right way to go, but maybe it's not the right way to go for a year or a year and a half or 2 years as we migrate from Exchange Online and then to SharePoint Online. What you don't want to do is get into a position where you buy E3 or an Office 365 subscription and realize, we only need Exchange Online. We're going to, kind of step down to that. That just opens up to an audit. It's a lot easier to go the other way. Start with Exchange Online, grow into Office 365, for instance. You really want to model out your options. I showed you just the summary of a much more detailed spreadsheet that had about 10 or 11 different tabs that looked at all the products and different purchasing options and things like that. But you really want to map those out. You want to map out what's the upfront cost versus purchasing a ramp. You want to map out what's the cost of buying Office 365 versus the ECS cloud suite versus just buying the individual services like Exchange Online and how those happen. And then you want to kind of try and combine those. How does that work with a ramp and buying individual components? What I didn't put in here is even looking at how do you segment your users, which is, do I need Exchange Plan 1 or Exchange Plan 2 or E1 versus E4, all those sorts of things. So these models can get very complex very quickly, but it is very crucial for you to do that, because that value gap that I spoke to, the $500,000 or about 30% for our manufacturing friends, is how you negotiate a better deal with Microsoft. You need to be able to say to them, that best deal that you're giving me at Office 365 has a 30% value gap. There's no way we can move forward with this deal because it just doesn't make sense to the organization. So you really want to, force them to come up or, grow up from your bottom line where you're being to where they want to be, so that they have to come down and shrink that gap, so to speak. Okay. And that brings me to my next point, which is really what we see a lot of the times, unfortunately, is Microsoft does have a plan. They call it T-36. You can actually go out and Google Microsoft T-36, and it is basically a roadmap of what your account team is supposed to do for the entire 36 months of an enterprise agreement. And so they do follow that. That talks about how they build out proposals on renewals to what they want to sell you each year and things like that. And like I said, it is out there in the public domain. You should go out and Google that and take a look at it, because it explains a lot of their behaviors sometimes when you understand that. But one of the things that they like to do is come in with what I call an aspirational ask of you. So if you're in a renewal and they're going to come in with that ECS suite, they're going to try and position that you purchase their server and cloud enrollments and all these sorts of things. And basically, if you were spending $2 million a year, their proposal is going to be $3 million, and then what they want you to do is try and negotiate them down so that maybe you land at 2.4, 2.5, and they're ahead of the game. They're up, 10, 15, 20% over what your last EA was. Whereas the best way to work with Microsoft is to go through this process that, and I've only shown you a simplified version of it, but go through this process that we've been talking about this afternoon. Set your baseline in terms of where you want to start, where your numbers should be, what's the absolute requirements that you have, and then make Microsoft work up from there. That's how you get the best deal. And we always say, and I know this is our business, but even Gartner and them are now saying that you should consider hiring experts. Our manufacturers, they thought they had a really good deal, and we were able to save them significant dollars that they were able to put into a couple other projects that were strategic for them. But this is getting complicated, and it's not getting any simpler. And I know a lot of the people I work with, Microsoft is just one of many vendors that they have to work with. I have a hard enough time. I always tell them keeping up on Microsoft. I don't know how they keep up on Microsoft and Oracle and VMware and EMC and all the other vendors that they have to work with. Considering if they just do IT purchasing. So that's really kind of what I wanted to get across today. I think if I net it down to the three simplest things, it's basically make sure that you have an understanding of what you don't need. That's really more important than knowing what you actually do need. And what we mean by that is, we don't need Office 365, we just need Exchange Online, for instance. I think that's key. I think the key is to look at the options and model those out and figure out what makes sense for your organization. Make sure those are defendable, that you've thought through, risks and rewards associated with those, so that when you go to Microsoft with it, it's credible, they'll believe it. And then, make Microsoft negotiate up from your position and cover off that value gap once you've done this modeling. When we do this modeling, we always find a value gap, and you want to make Microsoft work up from where you're at, not you working down from where they're proposing. So I think that's what I wanted to get across, Sean. I think I've seen a couple of questions kind of pop up. If you want to maybe ask what was put in the chat box, and I can answer a couple of questions that we've seen, and then we should be able to end at the top of the hour.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. That was really good. So we do have a few questions that have come in. I'll just encourage folks, if you have questions and you haven't asked yet, please go to the chat window and input your questions there. We'll do our best to get to everyone's questions. So Mike, kind of the first question I've got is from someone on the line, and they'd like to know, Microsoft keeps providing proposals, but they want the whole environment licensed on Office 365, and they don't seem to want to provide anything else. Is this normal?
It's definitely normal behavior from Microsoft in terms of, they want you to license everything. And where they come from when they do that is typically, if that's a renewal, I'm going to make an assumption that that's a renewal, a customer that's renewing. You're currently licensed for all your desktops with Office, all your users with CALs, all your desktops with Windows OS, and so they want to move everybody to Office 365. And what they'll usually tell you is that when you're coming from active software assurance on Office and the CALs, you get your best price on Office 365. And that is sort of true. What I mean by that is they give you about a 10% discount off of Office 365 if you're moving from active software assurance to Office 365 versus if you're just making a net new purchase of that. So in other words, if Office 365 was $200, I go out and I build a new company, 5,000 people, we decide we want Office 365, it's $200 a user, versus if we had Office and the CALs on Office 365, it's $180 a user. So they give a 10% discount. The challenge with that is that there is nothing within the contracts themselves, the enterprise agreement, that force you to license everybody with Office 365. In fact, the language in there allows you to do just a subset if you choose to, or you could purchase through other programs if need be, but it doesn't force you to do 100%. And when you look at their 10% offer, it only takes about 3 to 4 months of not using Office 365 subscriptions to dwindle away that 10% discount that they give you. And so when you look at the models, buying it on renewal with the 10% discount, if we don't deploy for 3 or 4 months, we're actually paying more over time if we look at a 3-year view or a 5-year view, depending on how you want to look at it. Any other questions, Sean?
Yeah, we do have a few other questions. Another question is, Microsoft is really pushing me to go to Office 365. I have the feeling that I'm going to get forced to go to the cloud by Microsoft sooner or later. Am I better off migrating now rather than waiting until they force me? Where will I get a better deal?
So again, this goes back to this whole modeling exercise. And I hear it a lot of the times, why are you moving to the cloud? If I ask a lot of, I'll hear things like, hey, we want to move, storage costs or whatnot. But I do hear quite often from companies that we believe that Microsoft is going to force us into Office 365 at some point in time in the future, so we might as well purchase it in our renewal. And the numbers just don't support that. Quite honestly, if you're not ready to go, buying now is going to cost you more in the long run. I think the key concept that is different than what we're traditionally used to from Microsoft is that subscriptions are monthly. So other than that 10% discount that I talked about before, if I don't use a subscription for 6 months and I buy it up front, I just paid for 6 months worth of a subscription that I'm not using. Imagine if that's 12 months or 18 or 24 months that I'm not using it. I just gave Microsoft money for licenses to sit on the shelf, so to speak. So because it is a monthly subscription, the cost models will show. And if you go and go through the process that we talked about, you will see that you're better off to wait, because there's nothing to stop you from going, 2 years from now or 3 years from now when you're ready to go, if that's the case. And so we definitely look at that in our engagements all the time. In fact, one of the clients I'm working with right now, was just that. We're going to negotiate Office 365. When I asked them why, they said Microsoft was going to force them there. But when we did the numbers and showed the numbers, and they shared that with the finance team, I think it actually went to the CFO on that one. He basically told them, yeah, hold off for 2 years. Let's do the bare minimum that we need. And we went through and worked through any risks associated with that, what rights you lose, because Microsoft will throw all kinds of things like, oh, you lose roaming rights or home use rights and things like that. But we'll work through what those risks are and mitigation strategies on any of those. Next question, Sean.
Sure. Next question is, my agreement's not up for a while in terms of renewal. When's the best time to engage someone like yourself in a negotiation?
That's a good question. So, typically what we say, and we have all kinds of relationships with clients. So some, a lot of the times our partnership, so to speak, begins around a renewal. And I always say that the organizations that we do the best with, we're engaged with, anywhere from 6 to 9 months prior to a renewal. We can do a great job shorter. I've done them. That manufacturing one was a 2-week engagement, but we've done them as short as a week, up to others that have us around for a whole year. So it really depends on complexity, size of organization, but ideally you want to start thinking about these renewals 6 to 9 months out, at a minimum. And the reason for that is, if we go back to that T-36 plan that I talked about, if Microsoft's going to come to you 3-4 months prior to the renewal with their proposals, you want to have done your homework, figured out what it is you need, build that bottom-up approach that we want to take prior to Microsoft coming to you, so that you can go to them first with this is what we need to see, versus them coming to you with their proposals. Other clients, we've got retainer relationships where we've worked with clients for 2 and 3 years now. So it really depends, but happy to have a conversation with whoever asked that question, and see if there's something there that we can help them with.
Okay, great. I think we have time for one more question. So the question was, it was a bit more on the technical side, but I'll throw it over to you, Mike, is, does Office 365 force upgrades on me because I have some interdependencies in my environment? Do I have the ability to contractually delay these?
So that's a really good question, and some of this really depends. I mean, Microsoft's announced these servicing branches now, focused around Windows, but they're starting to do some of that with Office. So I guess there's really 2 components to that, because I don't know exactly which piece of it they're asking. I'll kind of take it from both sides here. There's a component on the back-end servers, so Exchange, SharePoint, Skype, OneDrive, all those sorts of things. There's nothing you can do as an organization to control that. If you're in the Office 365 cloud, shared tenant, they're going to do the upgrades, and those upgrades are going to get pushed to you on the back end. Where there is a little bit of control is more on the front end around, say, Windows or Office. You do have some control. They are going to push out updates and things like that, but depending on how you set up your servicing branches, you can have those go to IT first. You can then test them and push them out. You can delay them for a short period of time or delay them indefinitely. So you can do some delays there, but there is a caveat to that. And what I mean by that is, if you look at Office Pro through Office 365, so if I buy my Office licenses through an Office 365 subscription, you're only allowed to run 1 year the older version. So in other words, Office 2016 launched, you're allowed to run 2013 for 1 year, and then you'll be forced to upgrade to 2016. So there are really no downgrade rights except for that 1 year period. So as much as maybe you can control, depending on how you set things up, some of the updates and patches and pushes, eventually you're going to have to go there based on their always current kind of strategy that they have with Office 365.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike. This has been very, very informative. I really appreciate it. But I was just wondering, Mike, can you, just before we wrap up, maybe if you can tell the folks how they can reach you, where if they have any additional questions, and maybe they're a little shy and they don't feel like asking, Is there a good way for them to reach you if they want to take it offline?
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the best way is if you have a question that we didn't get to today, or if you want to chat. I'm happy, anybody that's on the call, to have a free half an hour call to talk through your specifics and see, give you some guidance. But probably the best way to reach me would be just simply Mike at method180, so Mike at method180.com. You can send me an email, and I'll happily answer questions or set up a call. Or you can reach me at phone at 888-978-5129, extension 701.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mike. So I think that about wraps it up. As I mentioned, we have recorded the session today, so we'll be posting that very shortly. We'll provide an email to the folks who attended today, letting them know where the presentation is once it's up. And I should also mention that Mike has started a blog post series on Office 365 negotiating and licensing, which is available at method180.com. If you go to our blog there, the first post went up today, and it's part one of a multi-part series. So with that, I'd like to thank Mike for the wonderful presentation. I'd like to thank everyone else for attending. So thank you very much, and hopefully we see you again on another one of these webinars.